I didn't think a tomato plant could cause a war, but that was before I moved into Willow Creek Estates. You see, Willow Creek had all the makings of a picture-perfect suburban utopia: immaculate lawns, pastel-colored houses, neatly trimmed hedges, and a homeowners association stricter than a Catholic boarding school in the 60s. The kind of place where neighbors spy through blinds and lawn stripes must run east to west, not north to south. When my wife Jenna and I bought our house 3 years ago, we didn't plan to stir the pot. We just wanted peace, quiet, and a little space to grow our own food. I worked remotely as a software developer, and she ran a small Etsy shop selling handmade crafts. We were about as non-confrontational as a pair of fluffy bunnies. But apparently, bunnies don't belong in places like Willow Creek, unless they're ornamental and made of concrete. It started with the tomatoes. I built a small raised bed in our backyard, just a 6x4-foot plot with cherry tomatoes, a couple of heirlooms, some basil and peppers. Nothing fancy. But since it was just barely visible over the back fence from the alley, that was enough to trigger the wrath of the HOA. 2 weeks after I planted them, I got a letter in the mail. It was crisp, formal, and worded like a summons to a military tribunal. Dear Mr. Weston, it has come to the attention of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association that you have violated Section 14.3b of the HOA Landscaping Code, cultivation of non-decorative produce visible from any communal or public access area. As such, you are being assessed a fine of $1,500 payable within 30 days. Please remove the offending plants immediately. Regards, Bradford Kingsley, President, Willow Creek HOA. My jaw dropped. $1,500? I shouted, waving the letter in the kitchen. For tomatoes? Jenna looked up from her mug, blinked twice, then laughed like I'd told her a dad joke. You're joking. I wish I were. We'd heard of HOA horror stories. Someone getting fined for wind chimes, another for mismatched Christmas lights, but we never imagined we'd be starring in one. And Bradford Kingsley. That man was a character. Picture a stockbroker who never quite made it, still wears polo shirts like a second skin, and runs the HOA like he's overseeing national security. Instead of removing the plants, I emailed the board to appeal. Surely a rational conversation could solve this. I was wrong. The response was swift and colder than an Alaskan winter. Mr. Weston, Section 14.3b has been in place for over a decade. Decorative flora is permitted. Edible vegetation is not unless fully enclosed or obscured from view. Your appeal is denied. Failure to comply may result in additional fines and legal action. Respectfully, Bradford Kingsley. I stared at the email for a long time, fingers clenched on the desk. Jenna tried to talk me down. It's not worth the stress. Just pull them up. We'll get containers and grow stuff inside. But something in me snapped. It wasn't just about tomatoes anymore. It was about principle, about freedom, about not letting a smug wannabe dictator in Sperry's tell me what I could plant in my own backyard. I started reading the HOA bylaws like a man possessed. Line by line, clause by clause. I printed the whole damn document, highlighted it, sticky noted it. I even found a Reddit group called HOA Hellfire, full of people who'd gone toe-to-toe with associations like this and won. That's when the idea hit me. They didn't allow edible plants visible from public access areas, but they did allow greenhouses so long as they met setback requirements and matched the home's exterior in color and design. That was all I needed. I opened up SketchUp and started designing. A structure 10 feet tall, 18 feet wide, 30 feet long. It would be legally sound, fully permitted, and positioned perfectly to block the entire view from Kingsley's backyard porch. It wasn't just going to be a greenhouse, it was going to be. If Bradford Kingsley thought he'd won with his little fine, he clearly didn't know who he was dealing with. Within 72 hours of receiving that final HOA rejection, I had a full greenhouse design ready to go. I wasn't talking about some dinky backyard cloche or a plastic pop-up tent either. This was a full-on, professionally engineered, multi-paneled greenhouse, steel-framed, polycarbonate siding, reinforced foundation, built to withstand Midwest winds, scorching summers, and, most importantly, HOA scrutiny. I filed a construction request with the HOA Architectural Review Committee that following Monday, complete with design specs, contractor licenses, structural blueprints, and a 3D rendering that showed it matched the exterior of my house right down to the almond-colored trim. The bylaws were clear. Greenhouses were permitted if they were no more than 12 feet high, did not encroach on side or rear setbacks, and used architecturally harmonious materials. Mine checked every box. For the first time since this mess started, I felt giddy. Petty? Maybe. Legal? Absolutely. By Friday, I got the email. The HOA had approved the request, begrudgingly. Mr. Weston, your greenhouse project has been reviewed and is approved, pending standard municipal permits. Any deviation from the submitted design will result in a stop work order and potential revocation of approval. Regards, Willow Creek ARC. I could practically hear Bradford Kingsley grinding his teeth through the screen. I hired a local crew and got my permits expedited. Within a week, construction began. Neighbors slowed their morning walks to gawk. Some raised eyebrows. Others gave subtle thumbs up. A few whispered, "Is that even legal?" I smiled and waved like I was building the Taj Mahal. By the time the foundation was poured and the steel frame started rising, the greenhouse was the talk of the neighborhood. Kingsley didn't confront me directly, yet, but his wife stood on their patio every morning, arms crossed like she was waiting for a UFO to land. I noticed him peeking through his blinds more than once, and at least 2 drone flyovers that weren't mine. I may or may not have waved at one of them while watering my basil. When the greenhouse was finally complete, it was beautiful, sleek, clean, and modern. The interior held raised beds, a misting system, hanging planters, and a climate monitor. I even added string lights and a small fan system to circulate air and give it ambiance. But the real beauty was its placement. My backyard gently sloped upward, and Kingsley's house sat just behind mine on slightly lower ground. The greenhouse, positioned with expert precision, stood like a glimmering wall right between his porch and his prized view of the community pond. No more sunset dinners on the deck for Bradford. I expected an angry letter, or maybe a formal complaint, but what I got was better. It came during the monthly HOA meeting held in the community clubhouse. Jenna begged me not to go, but I couldn't resist. I wore my nicest jeans, a flannel shirt, and the smuggest smirk I could manage without looking like a cartoon villain. When Kingsley saw me enter, his eyes narrowed like a cat staring at a laser pointer. He opened the meeting with his usual spiel, then quickly veered into new business. Item 4, he said, barely hiding his distaste. A review of the recently approved greenhouse structure at Lot 17, Mr. Weston's property. People turned in their chairs. I raised a hand and gave a polite nod. The structure meets all current HOA guidelines, he continued, but it has caused significant disruption to the aesthetics and character of the surrounding properties. Some residents have expressed concern. I raised an eyebrow. I've received mostly compliments, actually. Kingsley ignored me. As president, I propose a revision to Section 12.2D of the bylaws to limit greenhouse height to 8 feet and require transparency levels of 75% or more to prevent obstructing views. Translation: he wanted to retroactively make my greenhouse illegal, but I'd come prepared. Point of order, I said, lifting a highlighted page of the HOA bylaws. Per Section 3.4, any amendment must pass with a 2/3 vote of the full membership, not just the board. He scowled. That's correct. I turned to the crowd. All in favor of me keeping my greenhouse the way it is? A few chuckles. Then hands went up, more than I expected. Maybe they didn't like Kingsley. Maybe they just admired a good middle finger to the man. Either way, I counted 17 raised hands. He tried to counter, calling for a formal vote at the next meeting. I welcomed it. From that day on, I became something of a folk hero. The tomato guy, the greenhouse rebel. Some neighbors brought by fresh clippings or asked for gardening tips. Others just whispered, "Nice job," as they passed. But Kingsley? He was plotting. I could feel it. And just as the summer heat began to rise, so did the stakes. It started with the snakes. First, one slithered across my yard, then 2, then 3. I found one curled under a flower pot inside the greenhouse. I wasn't too worried. Garter snakes were common here, but something felt off. They were showing up too often, too suddenly. Jenna was the first to connect the dots. One evening, she walked in from the yard looking pale. "There's one in our kitchen," she whispered. That was the beginning of the real trouble. By the time the 3rd snake found its way into our home, I was ready to call animal control and a priest. "Look, I know this sounds nuts," I told the officer, who showed up in khakis and sunglasses, "but we've had 5 snakes in the past 2 weeks. 5. That's not normal." He shrugged. "Garter snakes are common around here. Warm weather, plenty of shade. They follow bugs. If you've got mulch or dense vegetation, they'll find it." "I don't have a jungle in my backyard," I snapped. "This started after I finished the greenhouse. Coincidence?" He rubbed his chin. "Snakes like damp places, and greenhouses can attract insects. If anything, you just built a deluxe buffet." I didn't like that answer, but I let him do his thing. He set a few traps, gave me some repellent powder that smelled like peppery garlic, and left with a handshake and a business card. That night, Jenna and I sat on the porch, watching fireflies blink around the lawn like tiny warning lights. "This is retaliation," she said quietly. "It has to be." "You think Kingsley's tossing snakes over the fence?" She didn't answer, but her eyes said, "Would you be surprised?" Then came the fines. 3 in 1 week. $50 for unapproved lighting on the greenhouse. $75 for excess water runoff onto the alley behind our home. $200 for non-compliant decorative ornamentation because I had a metal rooster near the greenhouse door. Each one came with a typed letter, a dated photograph, and Kingsley's smug little signature. I appealed every charge. He denied every one. I filed a formal complaint. The board investigated and found no wrongdoing. Surprise, surprise. It was clear that Kingsley was using his position like a club, trying to beat me into submission with bureaucracy and nitpicky nonsense. But I didn't flinch. If he wanted war, He picked the wrong gardener. I went back to the bylaws. I read them like scripture, every paragraph, footnote, and appendix. And that's when I found it. Section 18.6, Conflict of Interest. Any board member with a personal stake or vendetta in a compliance issue could be temporarily suspended from voting on related matters if the claim was proven credible. So I began documenting everything. Every fine, every picture, every email timestamp. I created a spreadsheet, compiled witness statements, and even installed cameras in the backyard, not just for the snakes, but to track any unauthorized activity. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was building a case, and I wasn't alone. Other neighbors began stepping forward. One woman said she got fined for a garden gnome. Another guy claimed his grill had been deemed an eyesore. They'd all paid up, afraid to make waves. But I gave them hope. I organized a neighborhood meeting at my place. 12 people showed up. We grilled hot dogs, poured iced tea, and passed around stories like war veterans. Turns out, Kingsley had been ruling with an iron lawnmower for years, threatening lawsuits, jacking up fees, and bending rules to suit himself. A plan started forming. That same week, something shifted. Kingsley's attitude turned unhinged. He walked his dog past my house 5 times a day, slowing every time to glare at the greenhouse. I caught him photographing my recycling bin. He called the city about a noise disturbance when I ran my electric hedge trimmer at 6 p.m. Then he crossed a line. Jenna came home from the store one afternoon and found a dead snake nailed to our mailbox. It wasn't garter. It was bigger. A copperhead. Someone had killed it and left it as a message. I called the police. The officer, different guy this time, took one look and frowned. You should be careful. This is the second snake complaint we've gotten this month. Another house had one in their dryer vent. Which house? I asked. Kingsley's. That gave me pause. Are you saying this might not be targeted? That they're spreading? The cop shrugged. Not my call to make, but animal control's been busy. After he left, Jenna and I sat in the living room, tense. What if it's not just Kingsley? She whispered. What if we really disturbed something with the greenhouse? I didn't want to admit it, but I'd started wondering the same. The next day, I went to the local archives. The city planning office had maps going back 60 years. I requested all files on Willow Creek Estates, back when it was just farmland. The clerk handed me a dusty binder marked Hollander Ranch, 1962 to 1978. Inside were zoning documents, land usage records, and something else. A letter from a real estate developer dated 1976. We've halted construction on Phase 2 due to environmental concerns. The excavation team uncovered a network of old drainage tunnels, some containing animal remains, possibly part of the exotic breeding program from the 1940s when the Hollander family imported wildlife for their private collection. I sat back, stunned. A private zoo? Snakes didn't just arrive. They were already here, and I'd built a giant warm... I didn't sleep that night. Not after reading that file. Not after learning my backyard greenhouse might be sitting on the remnants of an old exotic animal breeding facility. One that had imported snakes back when Elvis was still on tour. I kept replaying it in my head. Copperheads, pythons, maybe worse. What if the snakes weren't just wandering in from the woods? What if they'd been nesting in those underground tunnels for decades, undisturbed, until I came along and built a 20-foot sauna right on top of their ancestral condo? By dawn, I'd made up my mind. I had to know what was under there. I borrowed a snake camera from a pest control friend I'd met through one of the HOA forums. Yes, that's a real thing. It was essentially a waterproof, night vision-enabled, snaking cable with a lens on the end. Not something you want in your stomach, but perfect for this job. I started in the greenhouse. I cleared out one of the planting beds and dug down, slowly and carefully. About a foot down, I hit something unexpected. Old stone, not natural, not even brick, something carved. I swept away the soil and found what looked like a flat slab with a faint symbol scratched into it. It was hard to make out, but it looked like a stylized H, for Hollander maybe? That's when the air changed. It got cooler, damper, and then I saw it. A small crack at the edge of the slab, just wide enough to slip the snake camera in. I held my breath and pushed it in. What I saw on the tiny monitor made my stomach drop. A tunnel, at least 6 feet tall, lined with rotting timber supports, stretching out into the dark. And then, movement. Quick, writhing, dozens of shapes slithering out of the frame. I yanked the camera back like it had burned me. They were under us, still, alive. That night, I brought the footage to Jenna. She watched silently, eyes wide. "We need to tell someone," she said. "Animal control won't believe it," I said. "They'll say it's overreaction. They've already written it off as summer migration." "Then tell the neighbors. Show them the footage." That's when it hit me. Kingsley. He'd seen snakes too. Enough to call in a complaint. Enough to nail one to my mailbox. He knew about this, and he was trying to scare us off. Not because of the tomatoes, not because of the greenhouse, because he knew what was underneath it. The very next morning, the trap was sprung. I woke up to Jenna screaming in the hallway. I ran out of the bedroom barefoot and froze. A 5-foot snake lay coiled in the middle of the hallway rug, tongue flicking. It wasn't a harmless garden snake. It was thick, muscular, patterned in dark diamonds. I knew the look from online forums, an eastern diamondback rattlesnake. Inside our house, it didn't even rattle. It just stared. I moved slow, reached for the broom behind the coat rack, carefully angled it toward the snake, heart pounding. Jenna had already slipped into the guest bathroom and shut the door, whispering my name through tears. I edged the broom closer, inch by inch. Suddenly, thwop, the snake lashed out, striking the bristles. I leapt back and slammed the door to the office behind me. I called 911, breathing fast. "This is not a drill," I said. "There's a rattlesnake in my hallway, inside the house." 15 minutes later, animal control showed up with a specialized grabber and a hard plastic carrier. They secured the snake with practiced ease, then stood in my living room shaking their heads. "This shouldn't be happening," one muttered. "They don't usually come this far into neighborhoods." I showed them the footage, the tunnel, the old zoo theory. One of the agents, a wiry woman in her 40s with a military haircut, nodded. "I've heard rumors," she said. "Old-timers say the original ranch imported animals illegally, zoo-grade stuff. Most people think it's just stories." "Do stories have tunnels under new housing developments?" She didn't answer. That night, I hosted another emergency meeting, this time with evidence. I set up a screen in the greenhouse and played the tunnel video. I showed the photos of fines, the mailbox snake, the copperhead. I even passed out copies of the archive file about Hollander Ranch. The neighbors were stunned. Some looked horrified, others angry. "This explains everything," someone muttered. "It's been getting worse every summer," another said. "Last year I found one in my garage. We need to dig this up." But the most unexpected voice came from the back of the crowd. "We can't," Bradford Kingsley said. He'd come, uninvited, arms folded, face pale. "This isn't just some backyard problem. You don't know what you're dealing with." I narrowed my eyes. "You knew." He didn't deny it. "I tried to keep people calm," he said. "Tried to contain it. That's why I kept the greenhouse rules tight. Any major disturbance wakes them up. Heat, moisture, vibrations, they think it's time to feed or mate." I was stunned. "So instead of warning the community, you decided to fine us into silence?" I didn't want panic, lawsuits, property values crashing, and most of all, I didn't want to find out what else is down there. He looked at me then, eyes hollow. "You didn't just build a greenhouse, Weston. You opened a hatch." For a long moment, no one spoke. Kingsley's words settled over the greenhouse like a fog, chilling every corner. "You didn't just build a greenhouse, Weston. You opened a hatch." Jenna stood beside me, clutching my arm, her knuckles white. The rest of the neighbors looked stunned, confused, even afraid. It wasn't just about HOA fines or a petty feud anymore. We were sitting on a dormant ecosystem, a forgotten underground zoo, full of creatures that weren't supposed to be here, and I'd accidentally flipped the on switch. After the meeting, we broke into smaller clusters, whispering like a town preparing for a war it didn't understand. Most people didn't want to get involved. Some quietly thanked me, then hurried off. Only a handful stayed behind to form a sort of unofficial action group. Just me, Jenna, a retired biologist named Claire, and two younger guys, Steve and Miguel, who worked in construction. Claire, bless her, brought actual research. She dug up news articles from the 1980s that talked about strange animal sightings in Willow Creek before it was developed. Escaped reptiles, wild dogs, and even unconfirmed sightings of a Burmese python near the river Bend. Animal control had always blamed exotic pets, but that didn't explain the frequency. "There's a whole buried habitat under this neighborhood," Claire said, spreading out copies on our dining table. "And when Weston built the greenhouse, heated soil, moisture, grow lights, it mimicked the breeding conditions of some of these species." I looked at her. "You're saying I created a nesting ground?" She nodded grimly. "Not created, reawakened." The next few days were pure chaos. At least 4 more houses reported snake sightings, one in a bathtub, another under a toddler's bed. The HOA email board lit up like a Christmas tree. But instead of apologizing or resigning, Kingsley doubled down. He blamed me. He sent out a letter to all residents, accusing me of creating an ecological threat with an unauthorized heat-generating structure that violates Section 12.3 and 14.6 of the Community Safety Code. He demanded I tear the greenhouse down within 48 hours or face daily fines of $500. The letter arrived via certified mail. I was still holding it when someone knocked on my door. It was Claire. "You need to see this," she said. She brought me to the edge of her backyard, right where the slope dipped behind her garden. She pointed to a soft patch of earth that had collapsed slightly. I knelt, brushed it back, and there it was again. Stone, flat, etched. Another access tunnel. "We need to map these," I said. "All of them, before someone gets hurt." That night, we started building the tunnel map. Using cameras, drones, old maps, and a little guesswork, we began identifying where the old tunnels might run. We worked in shifts. Miguel even found a set of blueprints in a forgotten building permit office that showed the original underground layout of the Hollander Ranch's reptile burrows. Claire highlighted the likely hot zones. Beneath my greenhouse, under Kingsley's backyard, and worst of all, beneath the community center where the HOA met. When I saw the map, I felt my stomach turn. They built the entire HOA boardroom, I said, on top of a snake pit. Claire looked up from her laptop. No wonder Kingsley's terrified. I leaned in. What's that section over there? The one marked X? That's the original holding room. The biggest one. They called it the vault. Is it still sealed? Claire paused. I don't know. 2 nights later, I found out. It started with a sound. A deep rumbling like a growl but wetter. Sliding, slithering, heavy. Then came the screams. From Kingsley's house. I ran barefoot through the yard, hopping over the rosemary bushes and tomato beds, and leapt the fence like a madman. Jenna was right behind me. Kingsley's back door was wide open, the screen hanging loose on one hinge. Inside, furniture was overturned, a lamp shattered. The hallway was dark, but in the flickering light from the kitchen I saw him. Bradford Kingsley, HOA tyrant, flat on the floor, arm bleeding, eyes wild, and above him, wrapped around the chandelier, was a massive snake, thicker than my thigh, shiny, dark-skinned, black eyes reflecting the light like glass buttons. It wasn't native. It wasn't a rattler. It was a boa constrictor. "Help!" Kingsley gasped. It came from the floor." I pulled him out with Jenna's help and slammed the door shut. But not before I saw the hole, right in the tile near the pantry. A perfect break in the floor, about 2 feet wide, like the earth itself had cracked open and let the darkness in. Jenna looked at me, shaking. "What do we do now?" I looked at Kingsley, clutching his bloody arm, then at the greenhouse, then at the neighborhood map, then at the vault marked in red. I took a deep breath. We go in. We planned the entry like it was a heist, not because we were criminals, but because we had no clue what we were walking into, and we knew if we got this wrong, we might not walk out. The vault. It sat roughly 40 feet beneath the community center. According to the blueprints Miguel found, it was the largest underground chamber ever built on the Hollander Ranch. Its original purpose? Species containment, whatever that meant. Claire guessed it was once a breeding ground for the biggest snakes, boas, pythons, anacondas, probably illegally imported, maybe even hybridized. But the weirdest part? The vault wasn't listed on any current property survey. It had been hidden during the development of the neighborhood. Built over, forgotten, until now. We entered through the greenhouse. The same slab I had uncovered weeks ago was now our point of no return. With Miguel and Steve's help, we pried it open completely. Beneath it lay a narrow stairwell, old wood steps, slick with moisture, descending into pitch darkness. "I hate this," Jenna whispered. She wasn't wrong. Claire brought down a duffel bag loaded with gear, floodlights, rope, motion sensors, and a tranquilizer gun she'd borrowed from a friend at the State Wildlife Agency. I didn't ask too many questions. The air was heavy, damp, and oddly warm, like the breathing lung of the earth. We descended one by one. The stairwell opened into a corridor, about 7 feet tall and just wide enough to walk 2 abreast. The walls were limestone, reinforced with timber beams that were now soft with rot. The deeper we went, the more unnatural it felt. No bugs, no rats, just silence. And then the smell hit us. A foul, musky stench that made my throat tighten. It smelled like death and wet leaves, like moldy skin and rusted metal. Jenna gagged. Even Claire, who'd worked in labs for years, had to cover her face. We reached a steel door. It was warped, rusted, and slightly ajar. Claire glanced at me. This is it. The vault I pushed. It groaned open with a scream of tortured metal. And what we saw inside made all of us freeze. It wasn't just a chamber. It was a cavern. Natural rock walls lined with metal piping, vents, and broken enclosures. Old rusted cages sat crushed in the corners, their labels still faintly visible. Reticulatus. Naya. Titanoboa. At the far end of the cavern was a pit, at least 20 feet wide, lined with stone. Around it were the broken remains of heat lamps and a cracked control panel. The entire vault had once been an artificial ecosystem, a bioengineered den, but now it was something else. A nest, a writhing, living nest, coiled along the walls, dangling from the rafters, basking on warm stone piles, were snakes. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Some as thick as fire hoses, others as long as a car. They didn't hiss, they didn't strike, they just watched. Claire was the first to whisper. They're synchronized, waiting for something. Steve backed toward the door. Nope, nope, I'm out. This is demon stuff. Suddenly, one of the snakes twitched, and a loud crack echoed across the chamber. A chunk of the ceiling broke loose. It slammed to the floor, startling the entire pit. The snakes moved as one, not wildly, not chaotically, purposefully. Toward us. We ran. I didn't wait to yell or argue. I grabbed Jenna's hand, yanked Claire by the arm, and bolted through the door. Miguel held it just long enough to slam it shut behind us, wedging a metal pole across the handle. From inside, we heard slithering, then pounding, the kind that didn't come from bodies, but tails, heavy ones. We need to seal the entrance, Claire shouted. Now! We raced back up the stairs to the greenhouse. As we emerged into the fresh air, Miguel and Steve were already grabbing cinder blocks, dirt bags, anything they could pile over the slab. We sealed it. Fast. Tight. And then we collapsed, panting, in the garden under the morning sun. Jenna stared at me, eyes wild. You built a greenhouse on top of a monster den. I nodded. Yeah, but now it's contained. For now. That night, Kingsley showed up again. His arm was bandaged, his pride shattered. But he handed me a letter. He had officially resigned from the HOA board. I started this HOA to build order, he said, but we built it on a lie, and on a nest we never understood. Then he turned to leave, but before he stepped off the porch, he added, You should burn that greenhouse down. I thought about it, but then I smiled. No, I said, I'm keeping it, just with a few extra locks. The HOA backed off. The fines were dropped. The neighborhood quietly agreed to pretend the whole thing was a wild animal incident. But those who were there that day, me, Jenna, Claire, Steve, Miguel, we knew better. The vault was real. The snakes were still down there. And the greenhouse? It wasn't just a petty revenge project anymore. It was a guard post. It's been 6 months since we sealed the vault. You'd think life in Willow Creek would have gone back to normal. Dog walkers on sidewalks, HOA meetings about fence paint, Sunday potlucks, and soccer moms gossiping over hedges. And for the most part, it did. But for me, everything changed. I wake up every morning before sunrise, pour a cup of coffee, and walk out to my greenhouse. It still stands, tall, proud, and impossible to miss. But it's not just a greenhouse anymore. I've reinforced it with steel beams, thermal sensors, and ground-penetrating radar. The HOA board doesn't dare step foot near it. And the new president, a quiet, glasses-wearing retiree named Doris, doesn't ask questions. She just sends me emails that say things like, "Please advise. A resident reported a strange vibration beneath the playground. Someone heard hissing near the storm drain by lot 12. Could be pipes, could be not pipes." I keep the community informed. Quietly, carefully. We don't use the term vault anymore. We just call it the below. Claire stayed on as our resident herpetologist. She visits twice a week, running tests, analyzing soil samples, checking motion data. She swears the snakes aren't just surviving, they're communicating, coordinating, nesting deeper. They're waiting, she told me recently, but I don't know for what. Steve and Miguel helped install the perimeter defenses. Nothing flashy, just seismic vibration detectors linked to a silent alarm in my bedroom. If anything moves beneath the greenhouse after midnight, I know about it. Jenna, for her part, never asked me to take the greenhouse down again. Instead, she painted a mural on the east-facing wall. A winding serpent coiled through tomato vines, its tongue flicking near a cracked stone. Underneath it, she wrote in small black letters, "Respect the earth or it bites back." And what about the HOA? The fines? The rules? Let's just say, they've mellowed out. Nobody talks about tomato plants anymore, or fences being 2 inches too high, or garden gnomes. After Kingsley resigned, the HOA quietly gutted the violation codes. The bylaws were rewritten, mostly by Doris and a few new, much saner members. Now they focus on things like park maintenance and neighborhood watch. And ironically, they let me run the neighborhood watch, because deep down, they know what's under us isn't a myth. It isn't a story. It's a secret we all agreed to keep. A month ago, Kingsley came by again. He looked older, tired, but peaceful in a way I'd never seen before. "I'm moving," he said, "selling the house, moving inland, no more HOAs." I nodded. Smart. He paused at the edge of my driveway. "You ever think about what might happen if they get out?" I looked toward the greenhouse, then toward the stone path I'd built around it, the warm earth beneath it, the weight of everything I now carried. "Every day," I said. He just nodded, then left. So here we are, a man with a greenhouse, a town with a buried secret, and a silent war waged between roots and fangs, soil and scales. The HOA fined me $1,500 for planting tomatoes. So I built a greenhouse that blocked the president's view and uncovered something ancient, primal, waiting. The snakes are still down there, sleeping, watching. But I'm watching too, and when they rise again, if they rise again, this time I'll be ready. Because I'm not just a gardener anymore. I'm the gatekeeper, the last line, the watchtower.